Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a perspective that might it might fundamentally break how you view your relationships. We're diving into the mind of the 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. And hey, fair warning right up front, this is absolutely not a fairy tale. His work completely strips away all those romantic ideals we naturally want to attach to our connections, and instead, it reveals the stark, undeniable machinery of human instinct that's operating right beneath the surface. It's fascinating, it's definitely a little dark, but it might just change the way you see everything.
So let's kick things off by challenging a universally accepted fantasy. Think about it. From a very young age, we are constantly told that love is something pure, right? We think of it as spiritual or transcendent, like it's written in the stars. But Schopenhauer asked a very, very uncomfortable question. What if love is actually just a clever trick of nature? What if, this entire time, we've been completely misunderstanding the true driving force behind our deepest, most profound connections?
Section 1. The Romantic Illusion, a Beautiful Lie. To really get Schopenhauer, we first have to take a hard look at the cultural mask we all wear. I mean, society constantly feeds us this incredibly comforting poetry, right? The idea of a spiritual union, moral virtue, emotional transcendence. We absolutely love the image of ourselves as elevated beings rising above our base animal desires. But in stark contrast to that, Schopenhauer argued for a brutal, functional reality. He saw romance as a biological contract, driven entirely by survival, evolutionary necessity, and reproduction. He basically argued that the idealized performance we see in society, the poetry, the romance, the grand gestures, the whole shebang, all of it has literally just one underlying purpose, and that is keeping us blind to the much deeper and much colder realities of nature. Which brings us to a rather cold definition. To the philosopher, what we call love isn't some noble spiritual pursuit. No, it is, quite literally, a refined trick played by nature. It's a massive delusion designed specifically to lure people together for the sole sake of reproduction. I want you to really think about that for a second. Every time you felt like destiny was pulling you towards someone, every time you felt that undeniable, overwhelming spark, well, Schopenhauer would argue that was just your evolutionary programming kicking into high gear. It feels profound. It feels exactly like destiny. But according to him, it is merely functional, just a fleeting illusion crafted by biology to ensure the human species keeps going. He had this incredible way of putting it. Attraction is instinct dressed in poetry. Schopenhauer observed that we naturally wrap our primal urges in these beautiful lies. We tell ourselves and our friends that we choose our partners based on their unique soul, their vision of the world, or their inherent goodness. But what if we're actually just mistaking reproductive value for moral character? It's a really tough pill to swallow, for sure. But he suggests we participate in this collective fantasy simply because the raw, unfiltered truth of nature is just way too unromantic and way too mechanical for our egos to accept. Section 2. Divergent Evolutionary Strategies. Okay, let's see how this builds into a fundamental biological conflict. According to the source material, men and women don't act as perfectly matched puzzle pieces or soulmates. Instead, they act almost as rivals drawn together by evolutionary necessity. Schopenhauer argued they operate entirely differently to achieve the exact same biological goal. Men, he theorized, possess this outward drive. They are compelled to conquer, leave a legacy, build empires. They seek meaning out there in the external world and are inherently restless. Women, on the flip side, possess an inward drive that is much closer to the grounding forces of nature. They seek preservation, stability, and security to ensure continuity for the next generation. And this creates an inescapable tension. It's this dynamic where one side dreams and the other survives, both of them bound together by the invisible contract of reproduction. Because of these completely different drives, neither sex makes purely intellectual or purely romantic choices when it comes to picking a partner. Actually, scratch that, it's more like they make entirely unconscious biological calculations, and it happens in the blink of an eye. It's based almost completely on what a partner represents for their potential offspring. Men subconsciously seek out youth, beauty, and health, simply because those are the loudest biological indicators of fertility. Women subconsciously seek strength, status, and security because those traits literally broadcast an ability to protect and provide. It's fascinating when you realize how deeply ingrained this all is. It's not actually about the person standing in front of you. It's about the biological symbols they carry, triggering ancient instincts we don't even realize we have. Section 3. The Art of Indirect Power. So this leads us to how these instinctual differences actually play out in everyday society. Because female evolutionary goals are heavily centered around preservation and stability, Schopenhauer observed that they had to adapt.
Being denied formal physical power for most of human history, they developed incredible weapons of indirect influence. We're talking charm, emotional leverage, beauty, grace, modesty, and softness. Now, he firmly believed that these subtle tools were not mastered out of malice or some dark, twisted desire to manipulate. Not at all. They were developed out of absolute biological necessity. It was a brilliant survival mechanism. It was a way to navigate a really harsh world and secure vital resources without ever having to engage in a physical confrontation. When we break down these different forms of power side by side, the sheer genius of this biological strategy becomes crystal clear. Direct power, which historically has been held by men, dominates the realms of politics, warfare, and wealth. And it does this by utilizing brute strength and direct command. It's loud, and its effect is highly confrontational. But indirect power, that operates relationally and socially. By using charm, emotion, and appearance, it achieves this invisible, quiet control over its environment. Schopenhauer noted that this quiet influence was often vastly more effective than male brute strength, primarily because the men never even realized it was being used on them. And that incredibly subtle dynamic creates what Schopenhauer so perfectly called the rule of the surface over the substance. It's an excellent phrase. Think about it like this. Men might physically build the world, but by using illusion and appearance as a strategic camouflage, women learned to shape the men who built it, without ever appearing to interfere. They molded actions and decisions not by issuing aggressive commands, but by softly inviting the illusion that it was the man's idea all along. Which brings us to Section 4, the collapse of the illusion. Okay, so if love is really just a biological trap designed for a very specific temporary purpose, what happens when nature's mission is finally accomplished? Let's actually walk through the 4-step relationship arc that his philosophy outlines. Step 1 is unconscious attraction. That's the initial spark, where instinct completely takes over the steering wheel. Step 2 is the illusion of romance, where poetry masks the biological reality and you become utterly convinced you found your ultimate soulmate. Step 3 happens when that biological mission, reproduction, or the securing of stability, is actually achieved. And then comes Step 4, the illusion collapses. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that relationships often end in feelings of intense betrayal and confusion, not because the person fundamentally changed, but simply because the biological program you were both running ended. Schopenhauer was completely uncompromising on this point. Love, by its very evolutionary design, is meant to burn hot and die fast. It powerfully lures us into procreation, it blinds us temporarily to all the annoying flaws of our partner, and then, once its job is officially done, it dissolves. Heartbreak, in his view, isn't a spiritual failure. It isn't a sign that the universe is punishing you or that you're unlovable. It is quite literally a biological punishment. It's the painful withdrawal symptoms of instinct. It's what happens when the romantic fantasy finally shatters, the brain chemicals clear, and you realize you were just being used by nature to keep the species going. Finally, Section 5, freedom through brutal truth. Now, hearing all of this, you might naturally think Schopenhauer was simply a bitter cynic who hated romance. But he didn't expose these harsh realities just to be cruel. He exposed them because he absolutely despised illusions and the profound, unnecessary suffering they cause us. He wanted us to face this fact head-on. What we call love is not divine. It is biological necessity dressed in poetry and lies. He firmly believed that humanity is constantly being used by a force much older and much stronger than our rational minds. He called it the will to life. This blind, striving force operates completely without our consent. It tricks us into believing we are pursuing our own personal meaning and happiness, when in reality, we are just participating in an ancient, endless cycle of breeding and survival. But wait, there is a massive, surprisingly positive upside to this harsh philosophy. By intentionally stripping away the poetry and acknowledging the raw engine of instinct beneath it all, we gain true clarity. And you know what comes with clarity? Freedom. We gain freedom from the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations of permanence. We gain freedom from our own endless self-deception. And perhaps most importantly, we get freedom from blaming our partners for the crash of a fantasy that we willingly chose to believe in. When we stop demanding that another human being complete our soul, we are finally liberated to see relationships for what they actually are. Their strategy, they have temporary purpose, and they are biological design rather than our ultimate eternal salvation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, you really have to ask yourself a serious question based on Schopenhauer's insights. Are you chasing a beautiful lie, or are you living the brutal truth? Will you continue to project spiritual transcendence onto what is fundamentally a simple biological transaction?
Or will you accept the stark reality of human instinct and try to find your true freedom in that truth? It's a heavy thought to sit with for sure, but understanding the true unvarnished source of our desires, well, that might just be the very first step to truly mastering them.